So welcome so much to this webinar. My name is Susanna Schofel and I'm joined by a wonderful panel. I'm going to introduce John and Donna to you shortly. As you get settled in, just a few housekeeping highlights. Any questions, please put in the chat or the Q&A box. We've got some time at the end of today's session to answer those questions, and we're going to try and answer a number of the questions that you submitted in advance during the session today. As well, for a certificate of attendance, please send us an email at info@evidenceforlearning.org.au and you'll receive your certificate via email. This session will be recorded. It will be also published on our website so that you can view it back if you'd like to, or if you miss some of it, you can revisit. And all of the resources that are shared will be available to you as well. And before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country. Particularly, I'm joining on Wurundjeri and Woiwurrung of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to elders past and present. I know that many of you are coming from all across Australia, so please feel free to share the traditional owners of the land in the chat as you introduce yourselves. At Evidence for Learning, we recognise that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are inviting us to walk together in a journey towards reconciliation, and we support their calls for a voice in Parliament protected by the Constitution. There are a number of new faces when we look through the registrations, so I'm going to provide a really brief introduction to Evidence for Learning. We are an independent not-for-profit organisation working in early years and schools in all states and territories and all sectors of Australia. We were founded in 2015 and we operate as part of Social Ventures Australia, specialising in translating evidence and then helping to implement it in educational settings. We are also part of a global network of international education evidence brokers, including our founding partners in the UK, the Education Endowment Foundation, the EEF. At the centre of all of the work that we do are educators and school leaders like yourselves, all of those people working with young people in Australia in every school. We build the evidence, share knowledge and support evidence use in Australian schools, and all of the resources that you will see today, all of our resources that we've developed are free and available on our website. You'll see on the slide in front of you, there's a number of ways to connect with us at Evidence for Learning. You'll see QR codes throughout the presentation if you'd like to jump into resources directly as well. But before we get into the content, I'd like to introduce my colleagues on the line, both sitting up in the Northern Territory today. So John, I'm going to hand over to you. Introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about yourselves, and then Donna will ping straight across to you.
Oh, thanks, Susanna. So my name is John Cleary. I'm the Senior Director for Education Improvement here in the Northern Territory, and I'd like to acknowledge the Larrakia people on whose lands I have the privilege of connecting with you from today, and to pay my respects to others past, present and emerging. So my role is a connecting role, I suppose. So it's my 16th year as a Territorian, not from the Territory originally, as a teacher, firstly in remote localities from East London to East Arnhem, all the way through to leading schools in a range of localities in the Territory, to a principalship, to now leading our education improvement unit and team, which basically connects our schools across our 6 regions in the Territory with the system and some of the priorities that are going in both directions, and how we as a point sort of help to try and make sense of that. And so deimplementation for us was a piece of work that emerged both out of the experience towards 2020, but also is our partnership with Evidence for Learning, who became one of our 3 key evidence partners, along with the Australian Council for Educational Research and now an AERO, but also the EEF previously, but really in bringing evidence into the decisions that we make as a system every day, and in a way that hopefully is easily accessible and meaningful for leaders across our schools and our system. Thanks, Susanna. I'll throw it to you.
Welcome back, John. We're delighted to have you on another one of Evidence for Learning's webinars. And Donna, this is your first Evidence for Learning webinar, so welcome so much.
This is my first ever webinar. So, firstly, can I acknowledge that the traditional custodians of the land that I live and work on, which are the Aranda people, and it's an absolute privilege to be living and working on this stunning Aranda land. I have been teaching since I began teaching in 1986 as a fresh-faced young 21-year-old, and was told to get back to the back of the student line. It hasn't happened recently. So high school maths teacher for many years, didn't really give a whole lot of thought to what was going on outside of my classroom. Like school leadership, system leadership didn't mean a whole lot. I was very engrossed in that. And then somewhat reluctantly moved into leadership and was quite amazed really to discover the impact that it is possible to have as a leader on learning in your school. So that journey started in 2014, and since then I've worked in a variety of different schools. In my entire career, I've always worked in schools with quite a high proportion of Aboriginal students and families, and so that's a really particular interest of mine, and looking at the impact of outside of school issues and what we can do within our schools to mitigate them and to do the absolute most we can to empower our Aboriginal students to go on and have amazing life choices. So that's me.
Well, we're very excited to hear from you tonight, Donna. To kick us off, a little bit of the sort of background on why we're doing this, and to set some expectations of what you're going to hear tonight. We wanted to share with you all some emerging research on the evidence of de-implementation. This is a really fast-growing space, and we're excited to be a part of it and see so much work coming out as well, nationally and internationally, to explore the considerations for people like yourselves, school leaders, and those who support school leaders. And to think about how de-implementation, particularly as we're getting into that really critical planning period for 2014, can play a role in helping support you improve student outcomes, and also improve the outcomes for your staff in particular. So what is de-implementation? I guess this is a good place to start. It's relatively new, as I said, but has really solid roots in medicine and healthcare settings. And that's where most of the underpinning research evidence has been sourced from, including these two definitions. So the first one is from McKay and colleagues and talks about the discontinuation of existing practices or interventions. And the second from Prasad around stopping practices that are not evidence-based. So there's nuance to both of these beyond the headline, and how we're talking about de-implementation at E4L is that it involves removing ineffective, costly, duplicative, or time-consuming initiatives. We call those low-value initiatives that can be withdrawn without disadvantaging students. It's really important that we don't see de-implementation as a silver bullet for reducing workload, but it is an option for school leaders who are looking to focus on implementing and sustaining practices that have the most impact for students. De-implementation provides an opportunity for school leaders to think about and lead a process of change, which gives educators time and energy to focus on what matters most. And it's going to be really tempting, and it often is tempting, and you'll hear a little bit about this from John today, about overcoming this mentality, is just to say, we're going to stop doing that. We're not going to do that piece anymore. So this approach doesn't account for the change process that teachers, these people who have been embedding these practices for many, many years in some scenarios, need to be supported through. Like, a lot of our teaching is really closely aligned to our professional identity. And so we need to be really careful in how we approach de-implementation, because we've got people at the centre of this. So it should be noted as well that de-implementation is not an all or nothing approach. There are scenarios, and you'll hear one of those at least this afternoon from Donna, where there is a scaling back rather than a discontinuation, or a replacement of something rather than a complete removal. And there are a myriad of reasons why you would choose to de-implement something. You have joined us today most probably because you're interested in de-implementation from one of these angles, either as a school leader or someone who's supporting school leaders. So you might decide when you're reviewing your school data that you want to de-implement something as your next step to free up time and focus on other things. You might have found that something you are doing is no longer having the impact that you set out to achieve, or that the problem is no longer existing, the problem that you set out to achieve. A more effective approach might have surfaced. So this happens a lot in education, where we're doing something and actually something that has more effectiveness appears on the radar. You might find that costs are excessive and unsustainable. You might need to make a space for something that is deemed a high priority. And the last one's important too, and that is you might purely be looking to lighten the load of teachers. And that's something I think that is coming up and up again. When we were first scoping this work with our colleagues in the NT, John and his team, as well as drawing on the research from fields like healthcare, we looked at the vast body of research on implementation. And there are certainly very strong parallels with this process. So we used a similar staged process from our implementation guidance report to frame up this de-implementation process. So much like implementation, I should say, de-implementation is not a single one-off activity, but it is a process requiring time and planning and really thoughtful follow-through. An effective de-implementation process is likely to be cyclical and follow the interconnected stages of explore, prepare, deliver, and sustain. Critical to this, particularly for the explore phase, is identifying the approach or the program or the practice that you will de-implement. And we'll talk a little bit about that. That came up a number of times in the questions that you submitted before the webinar. And before I hand to John, and then we get into the media discussion with Donna about what's happened for her at Gillen, is a number of the highlights or the considerations that were highlighted through the insights paper that we're going to share with you after this webinar, and that's available on the website. The first was to look at data and research evidence to help you make a decision about what to de-implement. And I'll share with you a tool that we've developed as well that might help you have a conversation around what's most priority or what the highest priority is to de-implement first. When you've then made a decision to develop an implementation or a de-implementation plan, so a roadmap for how you're going to set yourselves on this de-implementation journey. There needs to be a real understanding that this is quite a challenging process. You need to really thoughtfully plan your communications and your professional learning to support it. One of the things that we like to think about or consider is that de-implementation, we're getting rid of something, yes, but actually in the first stages of this requires a good amount of effort. And so it's going to be a little while before you're really hitting below that line that you were initially. So investment upfront, really important, investment in your time and resources so that that de-implementation can stick. Sometimes implementation and de-implementation go hand in hand because you are really looking to replace, particularly when we're talking about pedagogical practices, something with something else. And the last point here is to, if you are setting out to relieve teachers of tasks, is to be really conscious about holding that space. So if you've created space through a de-implementation process, don't rush to fill the space. Make sure you're holding that space so that people have that time and it's not just filled with something else. Something that we have been asked a lot about in the lead up to this webinar is around how de-implementation is driven, supported and encouraged at a systems level, not just a school level. So I'm delighted now to introduce John, who has been a key partner in this work, to share a little bit of the NT story of de-implementation. And then we're going to hear from Donna about how the rubber hits the road. So John, over to you.
Thanks very much, Susanna. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the story previously. I'll go back to my principal days. I remember being in a big conference as a principal with our deputy chief executive, who's absolutely fabulous at the time. Marion Guppy was her name, and she stood up and she said, "If it's not working, stop it. Right, just stop it." And we all went, "Yeah!" We all kind of cheered. She may have been, could have been William Wallace on a horse. We're all so excited. We're like, "Yeah!" And when we went outside, we're like, well, how do we do that? And so the challenge around, having this conversation was for us to say that de-implementation by itself, what's the kind of landscape it sits in for us within the territory? And our partners at Evidence for Learning have been so crucial in that work over the last number of years. About the last 5 years, we've been working together. So I might just jump to the next slide for me, Susanna, because as part of this work, we frame in something called the NT inquiry cycle. And this is our kind of way of talking about improvement, our our focus across both at a school level, at a classroom level, all the way through to our boardroom level, to our executive. This is the language that we use, that we move through those stages of improvement, and that we have that kind of key mantra that the right questions take us to the right work. And if we do that work well, we'll deliver improvement. So, ever an autobiography might be called, do good things well. It's probably the mantra. And when I see this on a fridge or something in a staff room, I get very excited as a school reviewer when I'm around the territory to see our inquiry cycle there, because alongside that cycle, there's some kind of key questions that guide our work. And in this space, it was that review and adjust space. How is the work making a difference? What's the impact of the work on student outcomes? What do we need to do more of? But actually, what do we need to do less of or stop doing? Which isn't always a question that we ask ourselves. And I think we often see here, and I'm sure elsewhere, that schools can often be filled with the ghost of initiatives past that haven't quite been de-implemented, that are hanging in there in certain pockets or places, and they draw time, energy, and resource. And we have to be really confident that they're making the impact that they were intended to make. And so that broader landscape for us, if we jump forward, sort of sits in for our schools within that broader inquiry cycle and our e-learn environment. But there's a few pieces in here I wanted to just draw attention to that support conversations about de-implementation to occur. One of those is that clear commitment to the school improvement tool with our partners, as from our reviews, that we've got a basis around the language that what we mean by school improvement, that we have those kind of key signature strategies, our improvement guides that help describe and talk about what improvement looks like in our schools across those kind of high impact strategies, about 24 strategies across those journeys. And they also talk about the change in behavior that you might expect to see if those strategies are being implemented. So peer observation cycles, for example, like what actually will change if that's being implemented well, and what are some of the implementation considerations or activities that can support with that. They've been really critical for us in having both an implementation conversation that you'll see in plan, and the links to guidance reports and toolkits and things that help sort of narrow the field for our leaders around where they might be paying attention to. Evidence is such a broad field. How do we help them to start to narrow that field into some of those manageable and accessible guidance reports that help synthesize that evidence? And then for the last one around our evaluation toolkits and our annual reports, etc., that evaluation guide was really critical for us too, and our partners in Queensland, and my thanks to the department there, who provided us with support to access those standards of evidence that they were looking at too and using, both in terms of impact, design, scalability, and investment. And that became for us as a system leadership team a really important point to draw on around actually have a language that we can talk about and talk to. Are we clear on those four when we're thinking about making a de-implementation decision of a broader program or even a quite discrete piece of work? So when we got to the next one, which was in 2020, 19th of May, 2020, to take you to that date, as we all were, I think we were in a really interesting space coming out of that first pandemic response for us, that actually asked us a question we hadn't been asked before, which was actually, it wasn't about what should we turn off, but what do we turn back on? At a whole of system level as a board, then we were really keen to undertake a quite critical piece of work at that time to say where and how will we prioritize our efforts. And de-implementation was an important part of that conversation for us as we were prioritizing our work. And there were three key mindsets that we brought to that work at a whole of system level as an executive board at that time. And the first was that we keep focused on the work, not the process. And we love this photograph, this kind of messiness of de-implementation. That's certainly how we felt at the time in making sense of what was happening, but also then ensuring that we kept focus on the work and not the process. And there had been, certainly a number of attempts at starting to reduce and to think about our commitments at a system level, that and within some of those efforts, naturally people were brought into the process. Well, is this process right, and how does this work, and did I have this in time? And so kind of attack the process rather than actually start to talk about the work itself. And to do that, it was a really important consideration for us to hold to. The second was around acknowledging as a system and as a board at that time that stopping things is hard. And I think if we could acknowledge that, then we know, as you described, Susanna, all the things that are tied up in de-implementation. People are really cognizant that bringing some of that work forward and saying this may be something which we need to reconsider. There's people whose work and commitment and passion has been poured into that work. And so how do we sort of tackle this idea of de-implementation being that if you brought something into the light, that it would be the end, to challenge that, to say, actually, by bringing it out into this conversation, it may be strengthened. It may be that it's not working over here or for all, but it might be working in a more concentrated way and might have the impact that we're looking for if we think about it a bit differently. So that was a really important consideration for us as a board. And the third was that we committed to being kind of tough on ideas, but gentle on people, against that previous point that there are people's work in this space. And I think nobody steps out to do work that's not impactful. But then how do we consider and look at that work in a way which is both respectful of the energies and the efforts that have been put in place, but understanding it going forward. And so for that, there was some really key questions that we asked as a board. We used a Tricker model and focusing on strategy formulation, but these were some of the critical questions that we put forward to say, well, actually, let's think about this in a really methodical way to actually think about, well, what's the most important work for us to be doing now? How dependent is it on other work that may be missing or not yet complete? What's achievable? How does it align to our existing commitments? But also, is there sufficient de-implementation taking place to enable those strategies or work to be achieved? So it was a really important point for us and allowed us to build towards what's now become our Education NT strategy 21-25. And that was the kind of launch off period for us to really have those really important conversations. And 3 elements emerged from that with our work with evidence for learning. And the first was that evaluation guidance, the use of those standards of evidence to support people to have a conversation about impact, design, scalability, and investment, and how clear we were about those 4 dimensions when it came to anything that we were exploring. We provided guidance and training around the use of that, and some simple frames as well, particularly logic models, to help us build that work from the outset. The second piece for us was around embedding that work around implementation, which we've been working hard on as a system, and trying to get that language in play around both those preconditions or foundations for implementation, as well as that explore, prepare, deliver, and sustain, which we built into our longer term strategic planning for our schools. And the most critical point of that in relating to de-implementation work was where we make an adoption decision or an implementation decision is the same as when we make a de-implementation decision. And are we clear that we've really considered all of the work that needs to happen, that we bring the same level of intentionality to de-implementing something as we do to implementing something, that it's the same level of work, and that there is some unlearning required in that space. That means not that they forget about it, people don't drop it out of their schema, but that we are really clear on why what we are going to do next is actually more impactful or a better thing to do than what we've been doing previously. And if we don't attend to that, and if we mandate that, then we found that that really doesn't result in the change in behavior that we're looking for. And the third part for us was then, that guide to de-implementation. And when I spoke previously about sort of, people being worried about bringing something forward that it might be the end, then for us, it was those 4 hours through our work with evidence for learning and certainly looking at the health research that helped us sort of think about a new language for de-implementation, that it might be about reversing something, that there's a significant reduction in energy, time, and resources. And that's sometimes because, there's something that we're doing that is actually not only not having the impact we are hoping for, but in some cases may have been detrimental to the learning of our young people or for our staff. That sometimes there might be occasions where we reduce. So a reduction in energy, time, and resources, and that can be actually something we've been trying to do here, and narrowing that down to a much smaller set that's more targeted, and therefore would benefit from that work or initiative in a more concentrated way. That we might replace, so the repurposing and possible reduction of time, energy, and resources, that the same need is there, but what's currently being implemented is not meeting that need. So how do we actually replace that? And then for rethink, the complete redistribution of time, energy, and resources, again, the same need is there. The approach, maybe not necessarily a program or the approach was the thing, but actually we need to rethink that and a complete redistribution to be able to attend to that need because it hasn't gone away. So that language of reverse, reduce, replace, and rethink just gives us a way of talking about de-implementation that isn't the end. And we found that that's helped us now start that conversation, but it's definitely an ongoing conversation for us as we continue to go back to that second mindset that stopping things is hard. Thanks, Susanna.
And thank you, John. It's really important, I think, to look at those sort of 4 R's, not because the process itself is different within them, but how you come to that and what the end result is. And we're going to hear from Donna in a minute about this being such a interrelated relationship between implementation and de-implementation that it's really hard to separate some of these things sometimes. So Donna, with that, I'm going to hand over to you just to share some of the story about de-implementation and how you've approached it at Gillen.
Sure. And I've just put on a 10-minute timer to keep myself from talking all night. So I do want to talk about one really brief thing, which I haven't run by John, but I'm sure he'll go with me on this. So in coming to this school, initially I could see there were quite a few things that need to be de-implemented, but we didn't really have the knowledge. So both myself and the assistant principal were high school teachers coming into a primary background. So our learning had to be very fast and very genuine. One of the things that was really needed addressing was student behaviour. So we really worked hard on our positive behaviour framework, but there were some teachers with just a really rusted on approach, which came from their entire career and their own experience with schooling, of shouting at the children. So while we had introduced a replacement behaviour, this thing that needed to stop because it was doing harm wasn't shifting. And so on the first day of the year, I spent half of that startup day talking about how it was imperative that everybody stop doing this, but I didn't just stand up and say it's all over. It was an article that explained the harm and defined it as verbal abuse, but then also working through each teacher's own response to being yelled at, and like an understanding that it was going to be hard to change that behaviour. And what did happen is we did get a very quick change in behaviour. And if people did, and they still did occasionally lose their cool and yell, they would come and tell me, and they would say, I'm really sorry, I yelled, this happened, and explain it. But it happened, that was a case of needing to do something very fast to change something very quickly. The other case that I want to talk about is our uptake of, so our school has a very low socioeconomic profile, but our literacy results were below what would have been predicted for a school without ICSEA. So we needed to do a lot of reading to understand the causal, what's the link? And what we found in our research was it was about our students coming to school with a very poor schema. So, and also defining what reading is. So for us as high school people coming in and going, teaching reading, and then understanding all of the steps from oral language, phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, phonics, decoding, fluency, comprehension. So how we get from each step to the next step. So what we realised needed to happen was to find a way to link the students' content knowledge that they were accessing with the literacy block. Now, it was really hard for a lot of people because, and it wasn't that we were trying to de-implement something consistent across the school, because we had teachers who come from a broad range of training and different ages, like our teachers who were in their 50s and our teachers who were graduates, teachers who worked in different systems. And so they had a whole lot of different ways that they were approaching it. And each of them felt that what they were doing was the right thing and they were getting their kids reading. So we went through a process that went from, firstly, in that instructional leadership, we needed to understand what was going to happen. And that meant reading, visiting schools where we felt they were doing things well. We settled on the high reliability literacy teaching and procedure approach from John Munro from Melbourne Uni. And then we set about 6 months of PD with our staff, modelling it through the PD, the approaches, and then getting our teachers to start having a go at producing some of the text guides themselves before any of this ever hit the classroom. So that was 6 months of solid work. And through that, building an understanding of the purpose of what we were doing to allow, I guess, my mental picture is people holding on really tight to what they've always done, to slowly loosening their fingers off and moving it over to the new thing. And then that became our ASIP goal for the next year. It was our only ASIP goal, sharp and narrow. We didn't look at anything else. And then through our collaborative planning processes, each team writing those text guides against the high reliability literacy teaching procedures together, guided through the assistant principal. and then a process of observing each other doing them. And that actually was about 4 years ago, and we're still going through that process regularly, building up that bank of things. But I guess the really key part then was at the end of each year, going back to the PAT quadrants and actually seeing the impact. So once people were really starting, and our NAPLAN data, starting to see, oh, this works. So there's one thing to like front loading it with all of the reasoning and understanding the purpose, but then trying it, going, well, I'm not too sure, because really the way I was doing things before was probably better than this anyway, to actually start to see the shift in children's results and to see kids who cannot read, but at the end of the week of doing the text using these procedures, quite happily chatting about photosynthesis or whatever, even though they can't read the words. So I think that that combination of those two things, and I think really honouring that everyone who was doing the thing they were doing fully was doing it with the absolute best intention. And I guess something that helped with moving forward is, because everybody was doing something different, you can hang on to your own personal way of doing things. But our motto, unofficial motto, the hallmark of a high-performing school is consistency, moving to something which everybody else is doing. The level of support that's available is really high, and being able to have a conversation in the staff room about a particular area of it, and hearing that common language build up within the school, very affirming around that. And I would say that each time, because that was a very successful approach, we've from then gone on and introduced and de-implemented. So a quick example is we are looking at robust vocabulary instruction as embedded in this process. And it's the way I learnt at school. Here's a new word, look it up in the dictionary, write the meaning down, now put it in a sentence. And we know now that that's probably not going to build the students' further use or deeper understanding of it. So we've introduced a set of procedures around that. And people will really, because it's what they've always done. And it's easy, and you can fill a book up quite quickly with children writing those things. Moving to the new procedures, people are excited about what they're doing now. But again, 6 months of preparing, doing the collaborative planning, and then introducing it in the classroom after people are really confident with it. So it's not fast, but it certainly works. So, and I'm just going to add, after talking to you two and learning about what de-implementation is, what occurred to me sometime later was the ultimate de-implementation process is raising children, because you have all these processes that you are doing when they're little, and then you've got to unteach yourself and let go of things and then find new ways to do things. So those of us who've done that have had an awful lot of practice at it. So I'll stop there and I'll let you guys take over again.
And Donna's being incredibly modest when she says we have just spoken to her about de-implementation. This is work that has been happening in schools for just an extremely long time. But now the language is building around de-implementation. And there's examples of de-implementation being done incredibly successfully. And we've also seen examples of de-implementation where the actual delivery of the de-implementation has not been so successful, and that has ramifications on the resilience of a staff and the culture of a school. There are so many things that can be considered, and I know, Donna, you've been incredibly thoughtful about this in ensuring that the next time you want to go ahead and do a project on de-implementation, a project of de-implementation, your staff are trusting, they're ready to go, they know that this is in the best interests of the school and the community, which is incredibly important. I just loved what you said about making sure there's another rope so that as people are loosening their grip of that thing that they've long held, they have something else to hang on to. And we know that de-implementation is, we can't just de-implement things all of the time and leave gaps. That it would be nice to be able to create more gaps in schools, but so often we do need to replace things, otherwise we slip back into habits, which is not going to lead to a sustainable process. Some really terrific examples there about timing too. We had a lot of questions, and there's questions coming in now, and please feel free to use the chat if you've got questions. The chat is working now as far as I can see, around the sort of urgency, but having to reinforce. So even if something's very quick at the start, like your example about the behaviour of staff in the playground, that needed to be sustained, and that was a really ongoing process, even though it was quick to begin. Professional learning has come up quite a bit in the questions, and so I'm keen, because your example really demonstrated nicely, Donna, that this de-implementation had a really strong process around implementation and professional learning to support a new way of thinking. Did you feel like there was much that you had to do to help people remove the models that they were working with already, or moving to a collective model that was being supported? Was that enough?
No, I think I'd like to use a different example, which is one that we're currently working on around de-implementation. So I guess one thing with professional learning, we're very cognizant of the train and hope model. So we realise if we bring in an external expert and they deliver to our staff and then they go away, we will probably not see a whole lot of change. So that professional development is planned over a lengthy time before implementation. So our most recent one is, we call it opportunities to respond, but we're trying to move away from the no hands up, like children only raising a hand in the classroom, to building engagement, everybody participating. So really trying to get our teachers to understand the downside of that old practice. So we spent a full day of introduction, but that was internal built expertise, not bringing people in. And starting by asking everyone if they could name the 3 children in their class who will put their hand up to answer every question, and which one of them will get it right, and which child will ask you, can they go to the toilet? And then to talk about the child who will never put their hand up, and to ask about, like, really thinking about all the characters in the classroom, and then asking each teacher to decide which one of those children they were at school, and they could all say which one they were. So to try and really build that empathy piece around what our current practice really is underneath it all. And then to actually, we wanted to build in different ways for our teachers to get the whole class to interact. So then we modelled those in our professional development and gave everyone a mini whiteboard and red cards and green cards, did lots of turning and talking so that they could experience the how that better engagement felt for them, and to talk about it, and then to get them to develop their own in PD little learning sessions so that they were trying it in a really safe space, and then going through collaborative planning, trying it in the classroom, and then bringing back. And it's actually by far the most successful de-implementation and implementation we've seen. And through our school review, the advice to build in a coaching model around that so that we can see it in practice. And it's happened by like much faster than anything else we've done, and with a much more positive response from our staff, just because of how quickly it worked. And I think that has come from the trust of it being the inquiry cycle that John's talked about, that we have done that over and over. And so that now our teachers like, okay, so what are we doing now? And off we go. I hope I answered your question.
You have, and you've very helpfully sort of tacked on 3 or 4 key points that come out of the best available research evidence on what great professional learning looks like. So we'll pull those sound bites out later as well. John, I want to pick up, because there's a couple of questions about, I mean, really fantastic example that Donna has used in her school as a school leader, but some of the feedback we've had recently is how much control, how much, where's my authority as a school leader to start to make these decisions and run these de-implementation processes? So how can you as a system or systems leaders outside of the NT be mindful of de-implementation in schools and then support with policies, directives? Are there other mechanisms or levers you have to pull to support schools?
Yeah, no, I love that. And I saw Tim's question. Thank you so much, Tim. That was great. And I mean, for us, Donna's just made a point of that there, that the same, the language and the same advice that we're asking our schools to work to, we have to hold ourselves to account to around as well, and one of the kind of key elements for us around that inquiry cycle, it provides us language, from the classroom to the boardroom and back again. That is language for us as a system that we need to keep asking ourselves those questions. And it's not just something to stick on the fridge or print on a t-shirt or a bumper sticker, but actually something that we actually have to get really practiced at working through. The second one for us is that in the same way that the school improvement tool, provides guidance around school improvement from ACR for our schools, the education system improvement tool asks the same of us at a system level. So practicing the fact that we have a consistent evidence base to work to that describes across those practices what systems do when they're supporting improvement. And one of the elements that came out for us there was around, if we're thinking about the priorities at a system level, what's the kind of cadence of those priorities, and also at what level? Sometimes there's a range of things that Donna will know this, that can come out of a system, some of which are still at the system level, review, some of which are at the regional level in terms of, the trialing, some of which get down to the school level, but not all the same things at the same time. So how do you also manage the flow of some of that work coming so it's possible? And also you're really clear on what it means for different stakeholders at different layers of the system. And then the last thing for us, I suppose, has been that evidence plays a key role, and we're not just paying lip service to that. I think one of the first things that we did in standing up the school improvement unit back in 2018 was stand up evidence partners to hold us to account, to be an independent voice, to ask us those questions, to say, I like to say Kevin Collins' 3 questions he used to ask to all his principals in Tower Hamlets. What were they? Was who told you to do that? On what basis did they tell you? And does it serve all children well, right? And he would say that there's far too much nodding and not enough knowing in education. And so we needed immediately independent partners who would ask us those questions, because the growing evidence landscape and the movement has been so exciting for us, because we partnered in a way with some really key independent evidence partners who've helped us at all stages prioritize some of that work. And in doing so, make it really clear the things that actually just don't align. And when you find things that don't align with the evidence and with what you're hearing from your students and from your staff and from leaders across your system, then that is the compulsion then to say, well, what do we do about that? And so, but building an architecture and a system that has consistent language that allows those things to be clear, I think has been part of the work for us. So yeah, so thanks so much for that question, Tim. That was great.
One of the things that struck me about the territory example when this was first getting up, John, was that this wasn't sort of set out and piloted in schools immediately. It was actually done at the system level up in Darwin with projects that were being rolled out by the department. So this was really modelled first and foremost by the central team, who then could road test, who could then set an example to say, we've done the thinking about this, we're confident that this is a process that schools can go through, and we've got examples here of things that we are turning off to support schools and not just asking of schools to de-implement.
Yeah, and there were things for us, you're absolutely right. I mean, but the key opportunity stepping into education NT strategy was then to say, well, if there's some core priorities for us at a system level, and to that point, I think someone just asked that, Nick there. Oh, James has written them for you, Nick. That's fine. On what basis? Who told you to do that? On what basis did they tell you to serve all children well? At that point, when you're placing that strategy and laying that strategy out, as a school would do, what and how do we draw upon evidence to help us make those decisions? I think when we first looked at our school review model back in 2018, end of 18, there was a school with 27 recommendations in their review, right? And we went back to them, and it was 3 years since their review, and they were still trying to make sense of those recommendations 3 years after. identifying there was multiple models of school review in place across the system that had been localized to regions but weren't consistent at the system level, meant we had to reverse some of those and actually say that's harmful. And particularly there was different versions of the school improvement tool out there and being used in those models, right? So we reversed that. But also then we still had to replace that. That need was still there with an evidence-informed, clear methodology from our partners at ACER, working with yourself around what happens post-review to bring those recommendations down to a much more reasonable and realistic level, but also support people what they do after their review and making sense of those recommendations. So that was a good example for us very early in the piece around a school improvement unit, where we de-implemented a practice that was happening across 6 regions, but not consistently, but still needed to replace that. We reversed the practice that wasn't helpful, but we had to replace that. Need was still there to support schools to help build their improvement agendas from a trustworthy model. So that was probably one of the first things I think we did as a school improvement unit together.
And you've touched on another one of the questions that's popped up in the chat as well, which is really around de-implementation and implementation and the timeline of how those things interact. And I think to sort of paraphrase the answer to the question, it's something like it totally depends on what you're doing as to the time frame. So Donna's given some really clear examples of this happening over a shorter or longer period of time, but also do we see implementation and de-implementation happening exactly parallel? Sometimes we do, when there's a real need for something to step in at the same time that something's being removed. Sometimes we see these as staggered things where we've actually removed something and then we see there's actually an unintended consequence of that and we need to introduce something again to at least in part replace what we were doing. I don't know if you've got thoughts about that, John or Donna, about your timelines for implementation and de-implementation.
I'll throw to Donna.
Yeah, I'd like to just say that I think initially we made the mistake of doing the research and then seeing that there was a better way to do things and then delivering PD, which was just, here's a much better way to do things, and hoping that people, and particularly initially around positive behaviour, but I think that some of the staff were taking that as, look, here's a good idea if you'd like to give it a go. Whereas what in our minds we were saying was, we would prefer you did this. So our big learning out of that was to have an implementation plan ahead of us. And even if it meant that we weren't changing straight away, that we're building the knowledge and then building the opportunity to practice and then building a time where this is now an expectation that everyone will do it. And I guess it's a little like, if you haven't had enough analogies, you're not going to move out of your house until your new house is ready to move into. Like, we're not going to just make people homeless. So we have to get that other thing ready and make sure that people understand that it's a better way to do things. And even if people aren't quite there yet, that they understand this is now the expectation. So we are all moving to this. And if you need some extra support, I think that we often do need an RTI model for our educators as well, because, I think often our young, enthusiastic, childless teachers are really keen to go. Sometimes when you've been doing the same thing for years and you're very wedded to what you're doing and it takes energy and time to move to that new thing, you might need to hold people by the hand a little bit more and help them move to that. And some people are very determined not to. And there have been occasions when they said, you know what, I think I might find a work environment where I can continue to do the thing I was doing because I really don't like this thing you're moving to. And that's kind of okay too. Like, if that works out to everyone's benefit. So
it's a really interesting consideration. I know earlier you mentioned the sort of unlearning piece, which is how do you build that understanding and the appreciation that there is a better model for XYZ, whatever we're going to implement or de-implement, and creating that real case for change in staff to make sure that they really fully invested and see that this is going to pay off for students, and that's why we're here. But I think the unlearning and learning component is really important because, as you say, for different staff, they're going to have very different needs along that trajectory of what do they know already, what do we build on, and what actually do we need to sort of unpick and unpack so that they can start to create new ways of thinking about such things.
And I think
we've got
as much as, can I just say, as much as convincing staff what's in it for the students, we need to help them understand what's in it for them. So if we're going to have much more engaged class, your behaviour management is going to be easier. So this is a good thing for you as well as it is for the students.
Yeah, perfect addition, Donna. That's a really excellent point. There's some more questions coming through. We've got a couple of minutes left and I wanted to do a quick wrap up. One of the questions that I wanted to give both of you just for a minute response is we had one pre-registered question come through about the role of students in this work. I mean, John, I know that this is an area that you're particularly passionate about. You see this work playing out on a daily basis. What's the role for students in de-implementation?
Oh, wow. We've got another hour. We just roll it on.
Not today.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that the work for us as a territory, students are partners in our school and system improvement. And I mean that legitimately. Both from the work of our Northern Territory Learning Commission, schools representing over 20,000 students now across the territory, the role that our young people play in the development of our education and T strategy, our engagement strategy, they're partners in that work. And one of the most powerful things that we found in that partnership with students in the first space, particularly around de-implementation, is how we expose some of that longitudinal data with them and we put on the table and explore it together. And actually some of our students, well, all of our students have something that we don't bring, which is the experience of what it means to be a learner at their school. And it's amazing how many times when we work with those, with our commissioners across the territory and young people in literally absolutely partnering with development of our strategy at a local and whole of system level, is that they can explain the story and start to point to the story that sits behind some of those longitudinal trends. And if not explain it, start to take us to some of the other conversations that we need to have to understand that story. We all said that longitudinal data has no agenda, just interesting questions, right? And so if we can start to explore that with our young people and empower them to be partners in finding out those stories that sit below that trend, that can bring us to the experience which calls to the why that Donna made a point so eloquently about, the making the case for, and why that change is so critical. With no bigger case than the impact it has on the learners for whom we are in service of. So that's been a key thing for us. Very happy to support and jump in if people are keen to find out more about that in the territory. It's built in and coded into our DNA and the way that we work.
This certainly sounds like part one of a bigger conversation into de-implementation. We've got a couple more things to cover today. I know there's still questions coming through in the chat. If we didn't get to them, I do apologise. Thank you so much for sharing them. We will try and answer these either in a bit of a wrap up or in a part 2 webinar at some point. But I wanted to flag a few resources that are available for you to start having these conversations or continue having these conversations in your own schools and settings. The first is a thinking prioritization tool that we've got. It's a couple of pages long, and this is just the kind of key diagram to start thinking about where are your high impact, high influence de-implementation priorities. So the things that you've got influence over, the things that are likely to have an impact if de-implemented, those are the things that you want to start with. So there's a bit of a thinking guide to help you start to map out, to do a bit of an audit about prioritization for de-implementation. One of the other resources that we have at Evidence for Learning is a reflection question toolkit for school leaders to think about what happens at each of these stages. So what are the foundations? What needs to be in place before you even begin to commit to a de-implementation process, and then through those stages of de-implementation. So these are available for you on the website, open source and free for all. We would love you to continue to connect with us on this conversation, on other conversations as well. Please feel free to reach out to us, to subscribe to our e-news, to follow us on social media, and of course to dig into the insights to de-implementation, which is available on our website. The links are all there as well. Before we leave, just 2 final pieces of business. First to John and Donna, thank you so much for sharing your incredible insights with us. It's always a pleasure to talk with you about de-implementation and everything that goes alongside of de-implementation. We are incredibly privileged to have your insights. And the second thing is we would love to get your insights and feedback on this webinar so that we can start to develop new webinars and also new resources. So sharing with you now in the chat a link to the survey, and we will leave that open for you to have a play with. You'll also receive a link to that and the wrap-up email with the recording in your inboxes in the next few days. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Donna and John. Have a lovely evening, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you at the next Evidence for Learning webinar. Thanks and bye.